Welcome to episode 41 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's highest-rated open-source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and boy, do we have a very special guest for you tonight. Before we get to that, though, let's do some introductions. First, from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is everyone's favorite eBay and Etsy camera gas pusher, is Mr. Paul Reibel. How excited are you for the Bengals' chances to make the Super Bowl?
Let's just put it this way. I'm not going to lay any money on it.
From Sydney, Australia, a man who thinks the Super Bowl is a large bowl filled with Tim Tams, is Mr. Theo Panagopoulos. Can you tell me what exactly a Tim Tam is?
Tim Tam is probably the best biscuit in the world. It's chocolate with more chocolate and a bit more chocolate. And if you do it right, you can actually suck your coffee through it.
Now, is a biscuit a cookie or is a biscuit a biscuit?
That's a good question.
We're hitting language barriers here. No, a cookie is different to me. A cookie is one of those round things with, chopped chips and so on them. A biscuit is something that's manufactured to be eaten with or without coffee.
And finally, from the corporate headquarters of Volta Coffee is Mr. Anthony Rue, a man who, if you search for his name on IMDb, is listed as Bad Side Dancer in the movie Dreamgirls. Anthony, is it true you really can't dance?
I am terrible at dancing. I know.
All right, as promised, we have a special guest tonight. With us, we have Brandon Monroe. Paul, you want to give a quick intro to Brandon?
Yeah, I met Brandon at a camera show in Cincinnati. Last fall, early fall. We had a great conversation. He wound up buying a Nikonos from one of the sellers, and after he bought the Nikonos, she had some questions about it or something. He actually shot some film through it and then reached out to her to tell her how it worked, which I thought was very cool. And then I found out he had taught himself to repair Contax cameras, which got my attention since I had 4 of them that didn't really work very well.
Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you. I appreciate that, guys. Yeah, I almost exclusively specialize in Contaxes, mostly because it seems like everyone has one that's broken. They're great cameras. I use them. I use mine every day. I usually shoot on a pre-war Contax 2, and I just really enjoy them. They're just built like tanks. I don't have Leica money, and man, they sure are underappreciated. But they're a real joy if you can get them working again.
That's a cool intro. We'll get a little bit deeper into that, but I want to let in some of our people we have in the waiting room. Looks like there's 4 people in there. Let's let them in.
So, Brandon, have you taken your Nikonos underwater yet?
I have not. I'm actually going to be getting there's an eBay store that's pretty popular for it. They pressure test it. And I want to get that pressure tested prior because I'm just too worried about ruining it.
Yeah, I've got a 2, a 4, and a 5. Actually, I've got 2 5s. It turned out that the 4 was not watertight.
I've always heard the 4s had the biggest issue of failure.
Yeah, they've got like a custom O-ring that's a molded O-ring as opposed to being a round O-ring. And I got a new one. I got new old stock O-rings and replaced everything and lubed it up and took it underwater. And about halfway through the roll, I was like, something doesn't feel right. I look up front and you can see the water line halfway up the lens.
Oh, that's tragic.
And I got it working again. I got the lens dried out, but it's completely non-focusing right now.
Oh.
But the camera's working again. I just can't take it underwater anymore. I just can't trust it.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. At least you always have a good hammer, is what I've found with this camera.
But the 5, I've shot hundreds of exposures with my 5 in the last 3 years, and it's a real delight to shoot with underwater.
Oh, I'm very excited. I have a cruise scheduled this summer, and
fantastic.
I'll definitely be taking it with me. That'll be the only camera going, probably.
Fantastic.
All right, we have 4 people we let in. I see Gilligan. I see Aiden Dean's back. How you doing, man?
Good. I'm good. How are y'all?
Doing well.
Steve Wilcox, welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you. My first time. Is my audio coming through?
Yes, sounds good.
You sound great, yeah.
That sounds great.
Great. Thank you.
How did you find out about the show?
Well, I've checked the website out occasionally, and my son-in-law, Alex Dietrich, encouraged me to join tonight.
Oh, okay.
I may have inspired him to be a camera geek as well, to some degree. So
very nice. And that's an awesome segue into Alex Dietrich. Alex, welcome back. It's been a while since we've seen you on the show. According to my records, episode 26, I think was the last time you were on. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that does sound about right. And my father-in-law gets about 75% of the credit.
Who gets the last?
He's fallen hard, guys. He's fallen hard, really hard.
Where are you guys calling from? Are you in the same area?
Same state. He's in Waterford near Detroit, and I'm near the Lakeshore in Michigan on the west side, a little town called Spring Lake.
Ah, okay.
I conveniently moved 5 minutes from Camera Exchange, if any of you have heard of it, in Waterford. That's dangerous if you're into Mamiya stuff.
Ooh.
And one more first-time caller, but it's someone whose name I recognize. Eric Cass-Lewis. Eric, welcome to the show.
Good seeing you.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Excellent.
All right, Eric, where are you from? For anybody who doesn't know who you are.
I am Dutch, but I live in Belgium near the French border.
Nice. So we have another Euro caller on a non-Euro episode. So we thank you for staying up in the middle of the night to come join talk with us.
He said he was going to make a large pot of coffee, so he looks a little over caffeinated, but
I've got some Belgian beer.
oh,
Oh yes, it's the one. Yeah.
My first experience with Eric was several years back. I had posted something about Orvo film, and Eric goes, you like Orvo, don't you? Give me your address. So he packaged up about like 50 or 60 feet of a couple different Orvo film stocks. So thank you again for that, Eric.
With pleasure.
All right. All right. Well, we have Brandon Monroe on the show. We did a quick intro about how Brandon got started. He met Paul at one of the camera shows. Brandon is self-taught in how to fix Contaxes. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking to Brandon, learning about what he does. We'll talk about the Zeiss-Ikon Contax rangefinders pre and post-war. But before we go any further down that hole, I just want to quickly address some errata. It turns out that 3/4 of the Camerosity crew screwed the pooch in the last episode when we were talking about the Pentax MX. Anthony had thought that there was a depth of field preview on that camera, and I kind of led the way and said, no, don't think it does. And we all agreed with me. But it turns out Anthony was right. We received probably more feedback about that one thing we got wrong than anything we've received in the history of the show. I got emails through my website, comments on my site. We saw people make comments in the Facebook group letting us know that we got that one wrong. So we are definitely wrong. So you guys know we have docked the pay for 2 weeks from the three hosts who got that one wrong. So we will not be paid for episode 40. But then we also got another thing wrong too, that not as many people noticed. But when we were talking about the K1000, we had commented that it does not have a self-timer, which most of them do not. But Marcy Merrill, who was on that show, pointed out that some did. Apparently it was like a mid-model change. I don't know exactly when or how to tell the difference other than just looking at it. So apparently there were some K1000s that had a self-timer. The Pentax MX does have a depth of field preview button, but after that, we've spent so much time on Pentax. I think we're on a Pentax moratorium. What do you guys think? Everybody's nodding yes. We'll just say that.
Just want to point out that with the MX, the thing that was cool about it is that it's actually the self-timer that is the depth of preview
right
button. You push it one way and it's a timer.
Yeah.
You push it the other way and it's for the depth of field. So
that's what threw me off. I'm just so used to it being a dedicated button. When I looked and I go, well, it just has a self-timer, and I didn't bother to touch it or read the manual. But anyway, all right. So Brandon, I mean, I think the first question I have for you, of all the different kinds of cameras that you could learn, why Contax? Like, what really got you into that system and to want to learn how to fix them?
Well, you know, it's always preached like German engineering, precision German engineering. So of course, the first thing that I wanted was a Leica. Well, that's probably the last thing that I could realistically afford. I kept seeing these amazing looking cameras for sale, and they were all broken. And I have a mechanical background. I went to school for auto mechanics, and then I'm currently going to school for aviation mechanics. So I was like, you know what, let's take a look at this. The more I looked into it, the more I realized the state of camera repair as a whole. And then looking at these, I talked to Henry Scherer, which is very popular in the contact space. He's kind of the golden standard for repairs for these. And upon contacting him, I find he has an 11-year backlog. And I'm like, well, that's just not good enough. So I already had the camera in hand, not working. So I was like, well, I guess we're digging in. And it's just been a trial and error process, a lot of research and a lot of really good help from some really good people in this industry. And here we are now, and I can get them working.
Just out of interest, have you actually managed to get that first camera working, or was that just your learning camera?
Yes, and a lot of lessons were learned with that camera. So the biggest curse with this system, and I'm gonna say it's specifically the post-war models, them putting an access for the tension adjustment was the worst thing that they could have designed into that camera body, because that gave anyone the ability to go in and just increase tension as that lubricant became insufficient. And a good majority of the cameras out there in the post-wars are over-tensioned to the point to where the springs are essentially failed. So they'll never be able to achieve proper shutter speeds again. And that's the biggest issue that I've noticed with them as a whole. Out of both the pre-war and post-war, that's definitely the big issue, and it's something to be very aware of for anyone that's looking at one of these cameras. If that thing fires off like a Pentax 6.7 slapping, you probably want to avoid it.
Are you talking about the tensioning adjustment that's kind of like the easy access from just inside the back? There's a little threaded hole that you can get into without taking the camera out of the chassis?
Exactly. Okay, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, that little, you'll see it. Right where you were pointing right there.
Yeah, a little threaded hole.
Yeah, that little port. Yeah, you can shove a small driver in there and you can tension. And the fun thing about that tension is the way that this camera is designed is it can only add. You cannot subtract tension. So if you go too far, it requires an entire disassembly. The way this camera is designed is that shutter mechanism is only accessed by essentially disassembling the entire camera. So if you over tension, it's kaput. So it's a very long process to get in there and release tension. So most people, it's mostly recommended you don't touch it really. If you're having an issue where you're having to add tension over time, it's probably about time for a CLA anyway. So that's really the best way to go around it.
When you tension it through that method, are you tensioning both curtains or just the second one?
So the way that the Contax system is designed, that's including the pre-war and the post-war, is the bias is built into the lower roller. So it's actually one single adjustment for both the upper and lower curtains.
Okay. For anybody who might be listening who's not even familiar with the Contax shutter, it's a focal plane shutter similar to Leica's and most other focal plane shutters, but instead of traveling horizontally, it travels vertically, kind of like a garage door. And it has rollers above and below the film gate. And the curtains, instead of being made entirely of cloth, they're made out of, is it brass? I mean, what kind of metal is that?
They're both brass and aluminum, depending on what you have. They tried aluminum and brass on the Contax 1. The post-war Contaxes are aluminum, and then the pre-wars, I think they're mostly brass. Don't quote me on that. I think the post-wars might mostly be brass as well. I can't remember exactly, to be honest.
So if you kind of like in your head picture a garage door, instead of being made out of panels, it like rolls up on a curtain, and then there's a curtain on the bottom too. So it's essentially the same concept of what Leica did, but going the other direction using metal slats held together by ribbons. The ribbons, am I right to say, are one of the more common failure points on those? I mean, you recently showed a picture of what they look like when they become frayed. But is that super common?
Yeah, that's been seen in probably about 50% of all the post-wars that I've dealt with. The ribbons on the post-war cameras, they don't actually ride on a friction clutch. It's a very different mechanism of action versus the pre-war cameras. So they're not technically considered as much of a wear item as they were in the pre-wars. In pre-war cameras, you will be replacing ribbons somewhat frequently. Now in the post-wars, it was assumed to be not so much as a wear item, as there's not actually a friction mechanism that's riding on that curtain strap, on that ribbon. However, what I've noticed is over time that small folded curtains, the small metal folded curtains, they catch on that ribbon over time, and it'll fray it, and then it just really messes up your speeds, and it can hinder the action of the shutter pretty severely if it gets bad enough. Any fraying at all at this point, it's just immediate replacement. And from what I've seen, I actually had an inspected shutter recently that had no fraying still fail, and it failed at the threads that fasten it to the curtain. So going here on out, I'm actually going to be replacing ribbons on all serviced post-war Contaxes that go through me.
So where do you get replacement ribbons for a nearly century-old camera?
I got a supplier out of Japan that supplies both my pre-war and post-war ribbon. The post-war ribbon's much thinner. That one was a bit more difficult to source. The pre-war, the best source is, I'm going to ruin the pronunciation here. It's Asahi, Aki Asahi, I believe is it's something similar. That's what I've found to be the best.
Now, do you know, is it silk? Is it just like vinyl or cloth, or what are they made out of?
Yeah, it's a silk ribbon.
Silk ribbon, okay.
Yeah, and then I fasten with a silk thread as well. I use silk thread when I'm fastening.
If we can step back for just a second for our listeners who aren't already deeply invested in contacts, just to give people some perspective as to what we're talking about here. Zeiss-Ikon, massive camera manufacturer, made folding cameras pre-war. The Super Iconta line were medium format folders. Their Contax were their rangefinders. Mike, do you know, since you're working on the Contax 1, do you remember when it was introduced?
The original version of the Contax was released in 32. They released it in response to the Leica rangefinder, which had been out since like 25, 26. By 1930, it was already one of the most popular 35 millimeter cameras in the world. And Zeiss-Ikon, after the merger in 26, focused tremendously on roll film cameras, and they must have just missed the boat. To be honest, in all the years of research I've done, I never found an explanation on what took them so long to embrace 35 millimeter. But by the time they got the message, hey, we need to compete with the Leica, it was quite a bit later. So the original Contax didn't come out till 32, and it was very much a work in progress. A lot of people talk about how complex German cameras are, and the Leicas certainly are complex, but only to a degree. If you actually look at how a Leica is designed, it's a fairly simple design. It's complex in terms of precision and hand built. Everything, all the fasteners are custom to each unit and fitted to every tolerance. Nothing on those cameras was mass produced. But when Zeiss-Ikon created the Contax, they took that German stereotype of, if it takes 10 pieces to make something, the Germans would use 20. And the original Contaxes were really, really complicated, and they were sort of learning as they were going. So throughout that entire first generation of Contax from 1932 to 36, there's many different revisions. In my review for the Contax 1 on my site, I explain the different versions, but even within those versions, there's some that have features from others. You could have an early version of the Contax and send it back to in fact, most of them were sent back to the factory to repair or upgrade something. So you might have an earlier Contax B with Contax F features or something along those lines. If you actually look, they at one point even flip-flop the orientation of where the rangefinder is. The rangefinder window on some is on the inside, on the others is on the outside. The original Contaxes did not have any slow speeds at all. They didn't add that until like the mid models. They changed quite a bit on it. Even the shape of the body changed. So like you think of the Contax 1 as one single model, but it's actually like a whole bunch of little models with this evolution about it. And then they didn't do the Contax 2 and 3 until 36.
And so at that point, you've got your two separate models. The main difference being that the 2 is without a light meter, the 3 had an uncoupled light meter.
Yeah, that's 100% correct.
And then post-war, they resume production and they just add a letter A to it. So you've got your 2A and your 3A, which from the exterior look very similar. I mean, and I'm not actually, because I've never worked with a pre-war, it'd be interesting to hear the differences between the 2 and the 2A or the 3 and the 3A. But they continued on with the uncoupled light meter for into the 50s, correct?
Yes, that's correct. One thing though, and Brandon will be able to speak to the innards a little bit better because I've never so much as seen the inside of these two, but it's not totally accurate that the 2A and the 3A were just continuations. Remember, the pre-war Contaxes were all made in Dresden, which would ultimately become East Germany, and all the post-war ones were made in Stuttgart. So while they're both Zeiss-Ikon cameras, they're both labeled the same way. The Zeiss-Ikon Contax 2s and 3s had to be kind of not necessarily from the ground up, but quite a few changes were made. The rangefinder is completely different. Mm-hmm. Brandon mentioned the design of the shutter was revised. It was simplified. So the Contax 1 was designed by Hansen, and it didn't sell nearly as well as they had hoped. The Leica was just completely destroying it in sales. So when they redesigned it in 36, Hubert Nerwin was put in charge of coming up with the design of the next one. So he changed a lot between the 1 and the 2. Externally, they look very different. They share a similar but not identical shutter. In some ways, the post-war models were kind of in that same regard too, where they made a decent number of changes to them. Both in the interest of simplification, mass producing, and I would guess, this is just my own opinion, an attempt to keep the prices from further escalation.
Do the 2 and the 3 and the 2A and 3A all share the same lens mount?
Yes.
No.
No? What's different?
The mount is the same. What they did was that they wanted to have a new Biogon 35 millimeter 2.8. So when the new 2A came out in the 3A, you couldn't put the old Contax Zeiss Biogon on it because of the retracting rear elements. So the pre-war or even some of the post-war Biogons couldn't fit the 2A. So if you have a Biogon that has the protruding rear end, it doesn't fit on a 2A or a 3A. That is important to know because you basically ruin your camera. So there is a small difference.
It'll make contact with the glass element?
It will make contact with the shutter. It just doesn't fit. So as I am a big fan of the Biogon, I cannot use the old Biogons, of which there are 3 types, on my 2A cameras. On my 2A, I can use 2 that is Zeiss lenses. The planar and the Biogon. The planar is 3.5, the Biogon is 2.8.
So Eric, it's the later Biogons are okay. It's the early ones that will not fit the 2A or 3A.
The early ones will not fit it. Okay. Now an example of that is this one. This is you see that?
Yeah.
That will not go on a 2A or a 3A.
So Eric is holding up, that's a pre-war Biogon, right?
Yes, it's a pre-war time. They made some until 1948, 49.
I don't want to say the S word too often, but is that what the Jupiter 12 Soviet lens is a copy of?
That's what I'm holding right now. Yep.
Okay.
Don't say to me that it's a copy because I'm the freak here, So, but yes, absolutely.
I want to say though, you kind of bring up a point that had occurred to me that I never really explored. I actually have the Jupiter 12 and I tried mounting it on a Nikon rangefinder and it wouldn't fit. It made contact in that too. So the reason is different. So the question was though, is the mount different? From the way you're describing it, it's a design of the shutter that interferes with the rear element, not necessarily the mount.
You'll see here a Biogon that is post-war.
Okay. Yeah, that's way shallower.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the big difference.
So I think the answer is the mount's the same, but not every pre-war Zeiss lens will work on the post-war cameras due to interference. Is that more accurate?
Yes, absolutely.
Interference. Okay.
How about the 21s? Were the 21s also have that much of a protruding rear element?
Yes. What I found is it doesn't work on a 2. I like shooting the Contax 2 cameras. The 21 just doesn't do it. It fits, but it's not happening. I have them both here. I took them out because this is one of these things that always come. So you got the 35 and the 21, and they come in these nice pouches, of course, because I am in Europe, so it's easier to get.
For the benefit of a future Camerosity Trivia Challenge, I have to say, in case I want to use it as a question, the original Zeiss Biogon, the 3.5 centimeter, was designed in 1934 by Ludwig Bertel.
Yeah.
So everybody remember that.
Well, here's my contribution. When Anthony asked, well, how can you tell the difference between a 2 and a 3, or 2A and a 3, a 2 and a 2A, or a 3 and a 3A? I have a terrible time with these things, but there is one tip off on these cameras that I know about now. On the rangefinder window, on the 2 and 3, it will be much longer. The
it's completely different.
The beveled
it's
edge
totally
will be
different.
totally different. And
Right.
You look at it, you'll know just by the first glance, you'll know which one it is, whether it's a 2 or a 2A.
Brandon, the rangefinders on the post-war models, is it a solid piece of glass or are there mirrors in there?
Oh, it's a wedge style rangefinder, so it is solid glass. Are you talking of the prism itself?
Yeah.
Here's a prism from a post-war camera. It is one piece of glass, just like on the pre-wars.
One piece of glass.
Yes.
Okay. They just shortened it though.
Exactly. It is just shorter. Yes.
Okay. So Zeiss was a huge fan of using not only prism but single pieces of glass for their rangefinders. I can't pretend to know all the models, but I do know that the Contessa 35, that folding camera, Anthony, I know you're a huge fan of that.
Love it.
That uses a very similar design too. The plus to those is, in theory, they should be resistant to coming out of alignment.
Yes.
Because with like a Leica and most rangefinders, it's actually just mirrors separated by air. So any part of that mirror gets jostled or bumped or something, that'll throw off the alignment. But with the way Zeiss did it, and again, this is in theory because things can still happen to them, having a solid piece of glass means the camera should be able to kind of get bumped around a little bit. And in theory, your rangefinder shouldn't come out of alignment.
As someone who's such a big fan of the rangefinders, I will say personally, I think the folding Contessa 35 is probably the best Zeiss camera there is to me. I am such a huge fan. It's bulletproof. I have bought so many of these and they are all just perfect. Infinity alignment, like you said, you can't knock them out. They're just perfect every time. You pick one up, doesn't matter if it's been sitting in a box for 50 years. It's just dead on every time.
Yeah.
And then a leaf shutter on top of it. You just can't really beat it.
I really, really enjoy shooting that camera.
Oh, it's great.
Quick question while we're on the topics of the rangefinders. Some of the reading, I have been known to pull apart a camera and over lubricate and do things like that to get things at least working. I guess two things. First, before I get to the rangefinders, isn't one of the differences, I don't own a pre-war 2. I have 3 post-war, but isn't there the thing that I've noticed to differentiate the two is there's like that foot on the bottom of the camera that projects out. To me, that's kind of the main thing I look for, rather than dialing down to the details. But anyway, so for the listeners, if it has a foot on the bottom to stop it from tipping over, that's probably a pre-war Contax. If it sands the foot, it's probably post-war.
Also very notable on that too, for differentiation, the frame counter is on the winding dial on all post-war cameras. So that's really substantial too, because you actually have a frame counter window on a pre-war. Okay.
And then the other thing that's a little frustrating to us amateur camera thrashers, repair thrashers, would be the non-adjustability of the rangefinder alignment on the Contaxes. Now, I've read where Harry will unglue them and fly a ship to the sun and let it unglue the glue, and so what's your take on that, Brandon?
Yeah, on the post-war units, that bedding that they use on those lenses, that tends to shrink over time, and like most of the cameras that I get do have a vertical alignment issue. That really is the only fix, and that bedding that's some tough stuff. They really fixed that versus the pre-war cameras, because all of that bedding on the pre-war rangefinders, it almost is always failing and cracks and just disintegrates into pieces. I can guarantee a hard bump and you're probably going to lose your rangefinder function on a lot of pre-wars if they haven't had that bedding replaced. Yeah, the post-wars, the alignment's very difficult to do. And it does require just completely unseating and reseating that glass and trying to make the adjustment that way. Sadly, you don't get to turn a screw on these and get that lined up again.
Okay, thank you.
And that's really the biggest flaw with the prism design is, yes, it's more accurate. Yes, for the era in which these cameras were designed to be used, they were probably pretty tough. But now that 80, 90, 100 years have passed, being able to repair them is much more difficult than like a Leica design where you could buy a new beam splitter. You can buy new front surface mirrors. Prior to the show, we were talking about Martin Seelig, who does a lot of front surface mirrors for TLRs, but any kind of front surface mirror can be used to replace the glass and a air-spaced mirror rangefinder. But the design that Zeiss used, when they go bad, like Brandon's saying, is it's you're basically like rebuilding the whole rangefinder.
Yes.
Is that Fair to say, yeah.
And the big issue that you get is over the past years, if it's been serviced before, a lot of times people will use improper methods. And the issue with these lenses and the glass used is it's very susceptible to conchoidal fractures, kind of like what you would see on like an Indian arrowhead. And I discussed this with Paul. I've been trying to make a workaround on this in those situations where you have those damaged elements that are irreparable. And what I've actually found, as we were talking about the Contessa 35, if you've ever used one of those, you'll know that you have a round rangefinder patch. Well, I'm actually, anytime you have those conchoidal fractures, it's almost always going to be found on the edges of your rangefinder patch. And you're just going to see these like weird light patterns from that fractured glass. And I'm actually using a vinyl mask on some of the inner lenses inside of the rangefinder mechanism to kind of essentially just mask off that damaged area. So it actually makes a very satisfying look as the finished result, and you no longer see those issues. If you've ever looked through a lot of these cameras, even in good conditioned ones, you'll get some just kind of general ugliness on the edges of the rangefinder window, just from issues with variances in the prism design and stuff like that.
Wow, that's neat. I would have never thought there's a way to improve that.
Oh, it's great. I've had a lot of success. I've done it on my main 2A, and it's really satisfying. It's just like using a Contessa 35 rangefinder.
Has anybody on this show had any experience with one of Brandon's repaired Contaxes?
Yeah, I have one right here.
Oh, wow. How convenient.
It's a 3A. In fact, he has two more 3As and one 2A of mine.
Yeah. You would have had two. I found out pretty late after that failed ribbon. I was like, well, that's not going out anymore. We're replacing all the ribbons on all the post-war cameras from now on.
So as a professional podcaster, Paul, what's your verdict on Brandon's repairs?
Well, Brandon had a checklist of things he wanted me to tell him whether I liked or didn't like. And I will say that it's the smoothest camera that I own at this point. The thing that's always bothered me about Contaxes and Nikons is that the focusing on it was never smooth enough. It was always jumpy and not the dampening varied as depending on where the helical was. And I know it was just age. They were probably perfect when they came out of the factory. This one is just absolutely smooth as silk. It has just the right amount of drag on it. The rangefinder is bright and clear. The speeds fire at all speeds. You got almost all the Zeiss bumps off the back. There's one minuscule Zeiss bump, but other than that, the camera's just a joy. My problem is I'm going to have to try to figure out which one I'm going to keep, because I really can't keep four of them. But I think the 2A will probably be the one that I stick with, though I like this one an awful lot.
That one actually has a responsive meter on it too. You know, I'm actually having pretty good luck with those so far on those selenium cells. I'm actually had very good luck.
My 3A is spot on.
They're great.
Perfectly fine. The meter is perfectly fine in it.
Yeah, this one is too. It just jumps and it moves very smoothly, and it's testing out within about a quarter of a stop.
Yeah, I noticed that one was really close. That's a really good responsive meter. It was jumping like crazy on me.
You had mentioned Zeiss bumps. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, yeah. So Zeiss bumps, it's just like it's a corrosion that's really common with the Zeiss cameras. A lot of other manufacturers had it too, but I don't know how Zeiss got to fit the bill on that one, but they really envelop that name. It's this horrible green corrosion that builds up underneath the leatherette. That actually, the one that you're actually seeing on that one, Paul, that was we had talked that those cameras had previously CLA work in the past. I was not able to remove that leatherette. Whatever glue they used on their prior repair was going to end up the post-war cameras had a thinner leatherette on them, and it's very easy to damage, and whoever had serviced that in the past had re-glued it with something that was going to disintegrate that leatherette on attempt. So yeah, I noticed that it was a singular Zeiss bump. I started digging to try to get at it, and I was like, this is going to ruin this leatherette. And the issue with that, replacing that, is there's that really pretty embossed Zeiss logo on the back of all these cameras. And it's really nice on the pre-war cameras because it helps differentiate you from the CLAs if you have that nice looking Zeiss embossed logo on there. So I really try to avoid damaging the leatherette on the pre-war cameras because everyone always assumes it's a CLAd most of the time. Yeah, that was the issue with that one. So most of the time I am able to get the Zeiss bumps eliminated completely. And what I do is I do like an enamel coat to prevent that from ever happening again.
Okay. Oh, wait, so when you get the skin off, you do the vinyl coat underneath the covering.
Yes, exactly. Because it always happens on the studs that are built like on the pressure plate that fasten the pressure plate to the rear plate. That's usually where you're going to see those bumps appear. Just from that differentiation in metal.
They're almost always brass rivets that go through the door, and it's only on the cameras that use leather. So like later cameras that have like the synthetic stuff, you'll usually not see that on there. When I sent my Contax one to Radu, he also removed my Zeiss bumps too. I imagine the same way by putting like a enamel or nail polish or something to kind of shield it from happening again.
Eric, I know you have a number of the 2s and 3s and 2As and 3As. Do you have someone do you do your own service on them, or do you have someone in Europe?
I have my friend Rick, who couldn't be here tonight because he's working tomorrow. Rick and I have a deal. I give him stuff that I find, and he repairs my cameras, not only my Contax cameras, but also my folders, my super Contaxes, etc. So we have a good deal. I find him the good stuff for the good prices, and he repairs my cameras. Now I have, 15, 20 Contax cameras. They're all serviced, and that is something else, because it's not for me. It's very easy to find the Contax camera here in Europe. Don't forget that the soldiers that came back to Europe and that were stationed also in the 50s in Germany, Dutch, Belgian, French, they came back with their camera, used it. They could buy it without tax. It was a tax-free purchase, but they've never been touched since. So for me to buy a Contax rangefinder could cost me between 100 and 200 euros, which is kind of the equivalent of dollars. However, to get them working is a different story, because to get my camera serviced, and luckily Rick and I, we have a good working relationship. He comes here a lot, we go shooting outside here. That wouldn't be possible because a Contax CLA is just rare to find. I'm not even talking about pricing. I don't really care about that. For me, to get them serviced, to get them right, it takes time and effort. And these are very complex and difficult cameras. Now, if some of you have joined the Zeiss Historica Association, Stephen Cove says hello to all of you, by the way. So does Rick. So for me, it is getting the cameras in. Now, this is not only Contax cameras, it's a lot of Zeiss cameras. I am surrounded by them,
Eric, do you have any of the Contax ones?
No, I don't like them.
You don't
I
like
hate
them?
No, I don't. I stay away from it. There's no way.
What don't you like about them?
I can't use them when I work. As maybe some of you know, I do have the great honor to be publicized in many museums here in Europe, Budapest and Sofia and in Bulgaria and Paris and Verdun and whatever. I can't work with them. The Contax one is like my nightmare. It just doesn't do it for me. But Brandon, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, certainly.
In my experience, as far as Contax, a lot of people buy Contax cameras because they're absolutely beautiful and gorgeous.
Oh yes,
absolutely. And I agree with you. And I find it heartwarming to see somebody really getting to know how to fix these cameras. It's fantastic. How are you going to deal with the enormous demand that is there? It is absolutely crazy here in Europe. I went to Cologne, I went to Munich, I went to Paris to get these things serviced. So my question to you, Brandon, first of all, I give you, in French we say, je te donne des éloges, which means fantastic. How are you going to deal with that? Because people are going to come after you like wolves.
I really appreciate that, Eric. I'll tell you what, I've prior to this podcast, I've done no advertising and I'm already booked out about 5 months.
There you go.
I have made I've made quite a bit of investments in tools and different things to make the job easier and faster, along with a lot of testing on my end. I've been doing a lot of testing on my end because this is pretty early in business and I want to be sure that these cameras are in great working order. I want everything that I send out to be a user, be able to be a user is the main thing. I know most are going to sit on the shelves, but I use mine every day, and that's what I want the experience to be capable of anyone who gets a camera through me. I mentioned that I'm in aviation school. I have a decent 9 to 5 right now, and actually, due to the incredibly overwhelming demand, I am taking a semester off to further pursue this very it's a passion project really for me. So this is really a big enjoyment of mine. So I am actually taking a semester off of school to pursue this and see where this goes, because like you said, there's a heavy demand here, and I'm getting great feedback. I'm getting a lot of interest, and I think I'd be a fool to not at least explore that, considering I have that option to do so. So for now, that's the way I'm going to be going about it, and we'll see how it continues. But yes, I've definitely experienced the demand so far. I get a lot of cold calls from different people with no advertisement, so that's really promising for me to see that type of interest.
And to see me at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning in Europe, because I wanted to see you.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I've figured out already about Brandon is that he is not going to cut any corners. He is absolutely obsessive compulsive. And I don't think he polishes every screw head when he takes it out like Henry says he does, but I can guarantee you that he will make sure everything is done properly before he buttons the camera up. And it's like you experienced with the straps on the 2As and 3As. He's going back into one of mine to put new straps in just because he wasn't comfortable with shipping it out without the new straps.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and that was following research of Henry. I've read Henry's site up and down. I've read that entire site front to back multiple times now to get his opinions, because he's very reluctant to give opinions, which is fine. I understand. Mark Hansen's been a great help as well. If anyone's familiar with Mark does some really great work, and he's been very, very helpful to me in this endeavor. Through reading a lot of Henry's opinions on these, and I'm sure his site has, it's probably got some age on some of the different articles that he's written. His opinion on the post-war shutters was that most do not require straps, assuming there's no fraying evident. Yeah, I'm just personally not convinced, and that's not a strike to Henry. I hold him as the highest standard of repair of these cameras. He has proven that time and time again, and I've never seen a bad review on that man. But after having one fail, and from what I'm seeing, it usually is the stitching that fails, that fastens the straps in that situation. So I'm going to warranty all work that I do, and the only way I can comfortably do that is to have touched every single thing. So I can't assume that 70-year-old silk fabric is, I just can't put my trust in that. So going through it, it's just the most comfortable thing for me to do from going forward.
What is your turnaround? So you said you're backed up, but once you start a camera, like on average, how long does it take?
As of right now, it's been taking me about 2.5 weeks to complete a camera, sadly. Okay. I'm trying to get that down. It's been the holidays and stuff like that, and that's been holding me up a lot. I'm hoping to get that down quite a bit. In solid working time, assuming I can get to it every day, I can have a camera done in a week. That's the fastest turnaround I've had. The issue with it is setting the shutter tension on these is a slow process, and it's usually best done in stages. So you add a little bit at a time. If you do it all at once, it's going to be a completely different animal in the morning. And that's kind of what I've experienced. So just the shutter tensioning process is kind of a multi-day thing, honestly.
In a previous episode, I think it was Cheyenne Morrison we had who would gladly want himself to be proven wrong on this one. It was mentioned that we predicted that in the next 10 years that the Contaxes will be unserviceable because there'll be no one around that could actually do it at all. Are we actually now saying that there's a glimmer of hope and a bit of a light in the distance of, Brandon, you've sort of bringing that back to life now. Are you planning on working with other people as well to try and sort of expand on this, or is that purely a project for yourself right now?
I have been documenting everything fairly heavily. I've put out some short content videos of some of my processes, at least showing people what needs to be done, not necessarily the process of doing so, but even that knowledge is hard to find. I am 100% willing to openly come out for the community on my processes and what I think it needs to be done to get these properly working. Any repair technicians that are interested in help from me are more than willing to contact me. I know you had another young camera repairman that Paul had mentioned had a camera. Paul, didn't you send a camera to somebody here recently?
Ryan?
Yes, I believe so. I had mentioned that I'm definitely willing to reach out to him with any knowledge that I've found over my research to help him get that ability.
That's Ryan Jones at Pro Camera in Charlottesville. We had him on a previous episode. In the chat notes, Aiden Dean is volunteering to learn. He wants to learn. So maybe you have found your apprentice here on episode 41 of the Camerosity Podcast.
I'll be definitely putting out some more content on the processes of doing these. A word of advice to anyone that is looking into these systems. The sad reality is these old lubricants are tired, and I don't ever recommend someone to get a pre-war camera that hasn't been serviced in the last 10 years and try to use it. The issue is a lot of the winding mechanism is very soft brass, and without proper lubrication, it will eat itself alive. It'll absolutely destroy itself. I really don't think it's a good idea to try to force one of these into function. It will ruin it. It'll 100% ruin it. The main thing with servicing these cameras, both the pre and post war, is getting in there and properly lubricating the winding mechanism internally. And if you do any type of lighter fluid dunking method and just trying to oil from the outside, it will 100% ruin that shutter.
Yeah, I've heard that before many times too. It's hard to believe that in many cases, the brass becomes weaker than the dried lubricants. The Agfa Carat, the 36, the Caromat, Ansco, which is the Cerebrad, it's actually one of my favorite cameras to use, is very famous for having a seized helicoid, because the lube that Agfa used at that time was slightly different than what other people were using. And unfortunately, over the decades, literally turns to cement.
That's that green stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it's like rock. It is rock hard.
Rock hard. And you can actually break the focusing mechanism because it's weaker than the hardened lube is. So what you're describing there with the pre-wars probably applies to any camera. You should, we always make fun of the Japanese sellers or the eBay people who say, I did not test this camera. I don't know anything about cameras. Believe it or not, that's actually a good thing, assuming they're telling the truth. A lot of times when people say they don't know anything about cameras, it's already broken and they're just lying. But if somebody truly just gets a camera from an estate or some old storage locker and they truly haven't touched it, that's actually a good thing, because it means that they probably haven't broken it worse before you get a chance to get it.
What I look for. Anytime I'm buying part cameras, I look for very specific things. Certain screw heads that I can see with signs of tampering with that enamel paint, it'll break right off if it's been tampered with. And that's the type of things that I look out for 100% when I'm trying to find bodies.
Steve, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm going to have to run off. I'm going to have to end here pretty quickly. I want to throw out one just very broad brush question, because we certainly have certain numbers of vintage camera systems to use. I'd like to get the group's consensus as to why the Contax. Why is that something that you're interested in versus a Leica versus the Nikon? What is it about the Contax cameras that you think is just really unique?
I love Zeiss glass. I just love the Zeiss glass.
I like them because they're different. This is not a knock on Leicas at all. Right. Anthony really recently just got a 3F and he was super excited about it. And I'm happy for him. But the reason I don't have a screw mount Leica is because I have so many of the Japanese copies that are at least equal and in some cases better. Mm-hmm. The Leica formula is good. There's nothing wrong with it. You can shoot tremendous images with a Leica, but the Contax is just such a different camera. To me, it's apples to oranges. Yes, the Contax was built to compete with Leica, but it is like saying a Toyota Corolla competes with a Mercedes or other way around. You can go to the grocery store and pick up some milk. You can take your kids to soccer practice. exactly the same on those two cars, but using one over the other is a completely different experience. And for me, I respect Eric tremendously, but I do not agree with his opinion on the Contax One because I love that camera. I will admit though, I had mine serviced. Radu Lasaru serviced it, and it works perfectly, and that makes a huge difference. And I don't mean to hijack your question, Steve, but I wanted to ask if anybody shot a serviced Contax One, but I think I have my answer. But when you shoot, like what Paul was describing, a properly serviced and working Contax, it is an experience that you cannot recreate with any other camera. Not a Nikon, not a Canon, not a Footlander, not a Pentax. It's truly something different. And that's, for me, why I love them.
Yeah, it is an incredible experience.
For me, it was that I'd always been an SLR person. And when I got my first rangefinder, I got very lucky in that I was able to acquire a 2A that was a museum quality, looked like it had never been used, but had been recently serviced. And that camera, I fell in love with it from the first roll of film I put through it. And to me, it's kind of interesting because I kind of blundered into a Leica 3M or M3, sorry, after I got the Contax. And I never gelled with the Leica like I did with that Contax. To me, and then going backwards to the Barnack, it really intrigues me that the 2 and the 3 were put out as competition to the Barnack Leicas, because it's like somebody went in a time machine and went back and did this like primitive Barnack versus this science fiction Contax, because it just feels so much more advanced than what that Barnack Leica feels like. Even the 3F that I just bought just feels very primitive compared to the Contax. And then the 2A that I had, once I started shooting with it, I think that I gelled with that camera with its ergonomics. It just feels like an extension of my finger and of my eye. I love the focusing wheel with the finger. I love the advance. I love everything about it. It just, to me, it's the most natural shooting camera that I have. And luckily, having one that had been serviced, there is a precision and a smoothness to that camera that when you talk about this, we had some going back and forth about the Soviet clones. To me, even a really nice Kiev that can be comparable feels like a Porsche 914 versus getting a true Carrera. It's like it's always just going to feel rougher and looser and heavier and less precise. And it may have the same appearance, but they're not the same cameras. There's not a substitute. It's not a straight analog. And it's a rare camera, because you think about that Contax. I mean, it continued after the Leica M cameras were introduced, and I still think that it's comparable to an M. I absolutely believe that my 2A is a comparable camera as far as between the lenses and the ergonomics of that camera. It stands up to a camera that was designed 30 years after this camera was first introduced.
The build quality is really a joy. The build quality is just unbelievable. You get one of these in your hands and you can just, you feel like you stole it for the prices that these are going for. Yeah. You really do.
You got to remember too, Zeiss was one of the biggest optics companies in the world when they designed that camera. They had resources that Lights did not. I mean, Lights was a microscope company. I'm not trying to shit on them or nothing, because they made good stuff. And the Leica was a good camera. I mean, honestly, Oscar Barnack's greatest asset for the Leica is that he didn't overcomplicate it. And that's why they sold as well as they did, because the Leica is a much simpler camera. And that, from a business standpoint, turned out to be the right move. Because if we're just looking at sales, the Contax paled in comparison to the Leica, right? From a user standpoint, though, they have a different feel to it. In fact, like literally today, I'm working on a review for the Icarex 35CS. This is an SLR from 1968. So this is a camera made more than 30 years after the Contax 2 and 3 were built. But this camera, despite being 3 decades newer, is heavy. It is solid as a rock. The chrome is silk smooth. There's very little plastic on it. The sound of the shutter firing, it just has a reassuring, I don't know how to describe it. Like, camera guys know what I'm talking about, though. This feels like a quality camera. If I had never seen another camera before in my life and you handed this to me and I used it, I would immediately know this thing was quality. And that's something that Zeiss put into almost everything they did. The Contax itself had every feature they could think of. The wider rangefinder base, the further apart the rangefinder windows are, the more accurate it could be. Being a prism meant that back then it was more dependable. The bayonet mount was considered to be not only more secure, but also faster to change and take off. The Contax 1 had a completely removable back, whereas the Leicas were bottom load. Just the massive amount of resources that Zeiss had when building that camera, the amount of quality and effort and the long list of features. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the lenses. Carl Zeiss created the Tessar. They created the planar. They created the sonar. Maybe with the exception of Fotlander, there wasn't anybody even close. You look at even early Bausch and Lomb and Wollensack American lenses, a lot of those are based off of German design. Another thing they did, which was just completely out there, in the early 20th century, Zeiss would actually outsource their designs to be built by other optics companies. So like you can get an early folding Kodak. I have one, a number 1 autographic Kodak. It's got a Bausch and Lomb Zeiss lens. And it's like, well, what is that? What's a Bausch and Lomb Zeiss lens? Well, it's a Zeiss lens built to Zeiss specifications, but by Bausch and Lomb. I think it was Ross or Cook, one of the British manufacturers, also made Zeiss lenses too. So their quality was so good, but they allowed other people to make things to their specifications. And that's another way in which Zeiss was able to expand their brand. So by the 30s, to have any camera with a Zeiss lens on it was great. And keep in mind, at the time, this doesn't relate to the context, but Zeiss also owned Deckel, who made the Comper shutter, and they also owned Gauthier. I'm butchering that, but they made the Prontor shutter. So the number 1 and number 2 most popular German leaf shutters were both owned by Zeiss. So just the incredible amount of resources they had when they built that camera is how they were able to do what they were able to do. And Brandon, I'm speaking for you here, but opening these things up, you mentioned earlier, it's a joy. It's a joy to work on.
It's unbelievable. It's just an absolute masterpiece in mechanical engineering. The big thing with the complications of the pre-war shutters was just avoiding all the Leica patents. There's nothing else like this. It's absolutely incredible to see it in action. I have a lot of videos posted. I think that I already have one on the Camerosity group. If someone wants to look back, I do have some different videos of this shutter actually actuating. The cool thing is the shutter unit on the pre-war cameras specifically, it removes as a whole unit. You can actually remove just the shutter assembly from the camera. It's almost as if the camera comes apart in like 2 pieces. And this will fire. Technically, the rear plate is part of the functional part of the shutter, as it keeps tension on this traveling shutter. But this will fire, and I think that's pretty neat to see the way they designed that.
Eric, you were holding up a lens just now. What were you holding up?
That was a Ross in Contax mount, a 3-inch. I found it in the Netherlands, bought it, and it's absolutely fantastic. To go a little bit further, for me, shooting a Contax, besides the fact that it's light, it's small, it works, it's mechanical, it's beautiful, and I like it. For me, it's a glass.
It's hard, I think, even for me, any of us, to truly understand how big Zeiss was. This is a company that existed since the mid 1800s. I mean, they had their hands in everything. In fact, I will offer this panel here a bit of trivia. See if Eric knows the answer to this. The Zeiss-Ikon Contax came out in 32. Okay, that was the first Contax camera. However, they made a product called the Contax in 1926. Zeiss-Ikon Contax, spelled the exact same way, Contax. What was it? Does anybody know?
I saw this somewhere. It's on my site. It was something very. That's probably where I saw it then. It was something very odd.
I don't know.
Want to take a wild guess?
I want to say it was like a toilet paper dispenser or something like that. It was really weird.
That's completely wrong, but it's equally wrong to what it really is. It was actually an automobile turn signal. Yeah, they made an automobile turn signal that you would mount on like the hood of your car. Before cars had turn signals. Like we think of SLRs with an instant return mirror, like that's not a feature, but there was a time when SLRs did not have instant return mirrors. Well, cars at one point in time did not have turn signals. So Zeiss-Ikon produced this thing called the Contax, which was this big, large circle, and it had like a solenoid with a big arrow. And when the solenoid was off, it pointed up. but when you activated in one direction, it would spin this way to indicate you were turning left. And when you activated another way, it would rotate the other direction facing, and it lit up too. So there actually is a Zeiss-Ikon Contax automobile signal. I have a picture of one on my website. If you actually dig deep on Google, you can find some early like 20s automobiles with this thing installed. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. Zeiss didn't create this design. They produced it in 1926 after the Zeiss-Ikon merger of all the four previous companies. The company that made it before them was Contessa Nettle. So that Contax turn signal and the name, it was still called Contax, was designed by Contessa Nettle. And Brandon, do you know who worked at Contessa Nettle that came up with that name?
I don't.
Dr. August Nagel.
Oh.
So Dr. August Nagel, who eventually made like the retina for Kodak, invented the first Contax.
Oh, wow.
Clearly the products have nothing in common, but
that's one I'll probably never repair.
It would not be wrong for you to say that August Nagel made the first Contax. You would be telling the truth.
I'll have to post that in the Historical Society and see if I can get banned as well.
We both want one,
Yeah.
I've got a Contessa Nettle tripod right here, actually.
Eric, if I can ask you a heretics question.
Sure.
On my 2A, I've got the heavy Sonar 50 1.5.
It's pre-war.
And then on the 3A, I've got the super light aluminum Sonar 52.
Yeah, I saw that. It was on the wrong camera.
But as far as the lenses go, I actually prefer the f2.
I do too. It's very hard to find a 1.5 that's absolutely gorgeous. It's the way it is. You have to buy a lot of them and see whatever is the one that you want. I have a lot of Zeiss 50 mils that I basically, the reason I don't sell them is because they are not great. And I just don't want to sell them to anybody because it's not done. It's not my reputation. I do not sell retail at all. I only sell wholesale. So I'll take 1/3 of the price and dump them into a wholesale environment. To find a 1.5 that's absolutely gorgeous will take you 5-6 lenses. To just touch on the Russian things, or better say the Soviet production, it took me 20 Jupiter 3 lenses, which is the 50 mil 1.5, to find one good one. I kept that one. The other ones were sold wholesale. It's here. It's absolutely amazing. This is a Jupiter 3 that I kept after I bought 20 of them, and this is the one I kept. So, what else I wanted to show you all is this famous, if you like Zeiss glass, if you can find this, buy it. This is the Amadeo adapter.
Paul's a fan of those.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, I have that for Sony and for Fuji.
I've got one.
And the
Those are
Leica
the best.
M.
Yeah, those are the best ones you can get.
Yeah.
Which one is that, Eric? Is it to fit what camera?
It's Contax to Leica.
Okay.
And it's coupled.
Yes. If I had been smart, that's what I would have bought. So I could have, then I would only needed one adapter to use it on 3 cameras. But
yeah, I was very lucky years ago to speak with him. He was still in Venezuela at the time. And he sent me this. He said, check it out. And he's a very nice guy. And he said, Eric, just check it out and tell me what you think. And then I got it in. And I said, it's great. How many more can you get? Because there's a lot of people who would like to have one. I know there's initiatives in Asia to produce more. I've used this professionally for reportage work in the Netherlands with a 50 mil on it. It's absolutely fantastic, but so hard to get nowadays. And I'm always looking because I'm scared that when this one doesn't work, I only have one.
Eric Amadeo now is in Florida.
I know he is, yeah.
He is making them again. In Venezuela, he was having problems. His workers were having trouble getting food even when the economy was in bad shape. I'm in touch with him fairly regularly. He's still making them, though they're very hard to get, as you say.
Absolutely. And we are here in Europe, and you all know, or most of you will know, that we have enormous tax problems, because when I buy something in the US, I pay 40-50% in taxes just to get it in, and I'm not talking about new stuff. I'm talking about, let's say a viewfinder that cost me $120. I will pay $120 just in tax to get it here. That is, if it arrives at all. I've been trying to find out what we can do to have a better arrangement. I have not found any solutions for the moment. But these Amadeo adapters are absolutely fantastic because I use my Contax mount lenses on my Leica.
On a slightly related topic, in terms of mounting lenses, is it possible to swap lenses between Contax and Nikon S mount cameras?
Oh yeah, I seen that question.
So is that the case? Can you do that?
It's most people it's an argumentative topic. The focal range is different between those mounts. A lot of people will say you can get away with as wide as a 50. A lot of people say don't go any narrower than a 35 millimeter. The focal range issue becomes prevalent and it can have some issues focusing. So like typically most people would recommend to avoid the 85s and like the 135s. Now something interesting, Nikon actually did produce a designated Contax. They did make those lenses for Contax mount. And you can actually, a lot of times the people don't notice that when they sell them, and you can actually get like a Contax mount lens if you might be trying to get one for your Nikon. It's something to look out for anyone that's in either system.
Yeah, Nippon Kungaku made Nicors at 85 millimeter and longer in Contax mount, and the way to tell the difference is there'll be a C imprinted on the side of the lens. It's not on the beauty ring up front. It's like engraved into the side. So they didn't do it for the 50s or the 35s because, like you said, depth of field takes care of the difference. In fact, Anthony, you bought one of my Nikkor 35 millimeter lenses and shot it on your Contax, right?
Absolutely. Worked perfectly fine.
Worked perfectly fine. Yeah. So it's a subtle difference between the design of the lenses. They do focus a little bit differently. And let me backtrack a little bit. You can still use the telephotos interchangeably at infinity. That's not a problem. The longer the lens, the closer you focus, the more off it will be. Let's say you had a Contax and you wanted to shoot a telephoto lens and you could only get your hands on a Nikkor 135. You could physically mount it, focus it to infinity, shoot with your heart's content, and all your images are going to come out fine. But if you start to focus that thing down, your images are going to come out of focus. So, but at 50 and wider, it really, maybe if you tried mounting the 50-1-1 Nikkor lens on a Contax and did a close-up, yeah, you're going to miss focus on that too. But for most people, you stop that lens down a little bit, what tiny infinitesimal difference there would be, depth of field is going to take care of that. But that's a good question.
I'm going to have to drop off real quick. I would love to get Brandon's website address, though.
I don't actually have a website. I use a Facebook page at the moment. I'm currently working on getting a website page live. I will go ahead and be tagging my page, if that's okay with everyone here, on the Camerosity Podcast right after this.
Sure.
Yeah. And that'll let everyone have a line of contact for me.
Yeah, Steve will include it in the show notes. Brandon's already posting in our group, so that information is going to become available.
Yes.
You heard it here, folks. Camerosity Podcast is the home of Brandon Monroe's contact service.
Well, again, thanks everybody. Again, I'll be back at some point. Thank you, Alex, for turning me on to this. And really, for all you who are getting involved in this crazy hobby of this, all these crazy cameras, my hat's off to you. We definitely need people to carry this on.
We have Jess Ibarra. We have a lot of people who are learning, and it's
awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming,
talking to you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
We're sort of hitting the 90-minute mark at the moment. It'd be interesting before we sort of go on to things like lightning rounds, etc. Can I get everybody to just hold up their right hand? I want to see how many Contax claws we have here, people that are permanent. Because we haven't actually touched on the Contax claw discussion and what that is. To help people listening, the Contax claw is how you actually hold a Contax or a Kiev 4 or a Nikon S camera.
The pre-war
ones, because the actual rangefinder window is so far to the right that if you hold the camera normally as you would a lot of other rangefinders, you'll actually cover the window and not be able to focus. So that's one of the, and I have to sort of come clean here, is I've never actually even held a Contax camera rangefinder. So I feel like I'm missing out here.
You really are. You need to make that happen.
Leo's gonna lose his Camerosity pay for the second episode in a row now. So.
But I have played around with a Kiev 4, and I must admit I didn't find that natural compared to using other rangefinders. Probably because I've used the other rangefinders more.
Yeah.
How do people find holding the Contax?
It becomes a second nature.
Yeah, I agree. Like the very first time you pick it up, you're like, crap, I can't see the rangefinder pitch. Oh yeah, that's why. I mean, it is definitely not intuitive the first time you pick it up, but it's literally just a difference of moving one finger a little bit lower down. Eric has a post-war. It's not quite as bad on the post-wars because the rangefinder window is closer to the lens mount, but on the pre-wars and the Kievs, the rangefinder window is almost all the way to the extreme edge of the camera. So as long as you arrange your right hand fingers in a way where you could hit the shutter release without blocking the window. There you go. So what Eric's doing, he has his index finger on the shutter release, and then his other three fingers are bent kind of down, gripping the body.
There's something interesting there to look at, that what Eric's doing there, and it's something that I do find people mistake when they're doing the Contax grip. Notice his finger placement on the shutter button. He's going to be depressing it with the crease of the knuckle, not the tip of his finger. The shutter's temperamental if you use the tip of your finger.
Well seen. Very good.
Yes.
Good.
Easter egg.
That's an interesting thing to note, and it's highlighted in all the official documentation. Yeah, you actually want to.
Paul's checking it out now.
Yeah, there you go.
So you kind of rest your finger a little bit lengthwise on that large circle. Press down. Okay.
You just press the
try that.
side of your finger rather than the tip.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
If you use the tip of your finger, it actually can cause the shutter to be temperamental sometimes and catch.
So Eric, when you're shooting yours, do you use the fine focus wheel at all, or did you just focus the lens directly?
I focus it by my left hand.
Okay.
Absolutely.
For people who do try to use the fine focus wheel, I wonder if, and maybe this could be a question for the group, do you just move your shutter release finger forward to move it, or do you attempt to have your middle finger doing that?
I use the middle finger.
Middle finger? So
yeah, gotta follow the manual.
Yeah.
That's what they want. That's what they wanted. The Germans did it right. They knew what they were doing. You gotta use that middle finger.
So real quick, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, because I do need to defend the Kievs just a tiny bit. We all know that there were tons and tons of copies of the Leicas made. The Feds and the Zorkis were true copies. They took a Leica, they looked at it, they reverse engineered it, and then they had children build it, right? The quality of a Soviet Leica, it is truly a copy. It's not the same. There are machining differences. The parts were made to different tolerances, lots of different, the quality just doesn't compare. However, the story goes, for anybody who's not familiar, I won't repeat all of it, but essentially after the war, the Soviet Union moved into what would become East Germany, which is where Dresden is, which is where the Contaxes were made. And they essentially targeted the Zeiss's plant and as for war reparations. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to take as much of the German optics industry, because remember, Dresden was where most of it was at. Pre-war, there was some stuff out west. By and large, the heart of the German camera industry was in Dresden and the Dresden area. And the Soviet got control over all of that. Thankfully, a lot of the Zeiss factories were not completely obliterated. So the Soviet Union basically confiscated tons of spare parts, the machinery. They even took some of the head designers and put them on a train and transferred them down to Ukraine, to Kiev, where they wanted to build their own premium camera. Because even back then, the Contax was considered the top dog. The Leica was the more consumer-oriented camera. The Contax was the best of the best, and that's what the Soviets wanted.
Hey, we shot Normandy.
The original Kievs were made up of spare Contax parts. The lenses were spare. A lot of it was shot glass. That the lens mounts, they made a ton of lens mounts that were used in those early cameras. In fact, if you get an early Kiev camera and disassemble it and take the faceplate off and flip it upside down, you can still see the original Contax logo stamped in the metal that they just used. They either sanded it down or used some kind of filler. I don't know exactly how they did it, but the earliest Kievs are actual Contax parts just put together. Now, you could argue they weren't as skilled as assembling as maybe the Germans were, and that's probably true. But for the most part, early Kievs are Contaxes. They're made of the same German-built parts, the same German lenses. You can debate on the quality of them still, but it's important to differentiate between the Feds and the Zorkis, which were truly a copy, a lower quality copy, whereas the Kievs were a continuation, a Soviet continuation of those German cameras. And yes, the quality did dip. Later Contaxes, as they ran out of, later Kievs, as they ran out of those original parts and had to start manufacturing things themselves, the Soviet Union was not good about investing money into new machinery. So they reused those machines, those lathes, those whatever parts they needed to make. They used them far beyond their usable lifespan. Those original technicians died off. So quality control by the 70s and even 80s, when the Kievs were still made, were just downright atrocious. So of course those do not compare, but you get an early 50s, even I think they made them in 49. I could be wrong on that, but the earliest Kievs were very good. And you get a good Kiev, one that has been serviced. It's, Eric, plug your ears for a second there. Just plug them. It's 95, 96% of the quality of a Contax. They're just not all like that. So, if you have a Kiev 4 and it works great and you're really, really happy with it, keep using it. They're great too. They're not the originals though. And one last bit of trivia. Sorry, I have so much I want to say. For a very, very short period of time, after the Soviets confiscated the Zeiss-Ikon factory and transferred everything down, they did not transfer all the employees. They just transferred some of the head guys. But they basically left the whole assembly team and all these guys behind in Dresden with literally nothing to do. They went down to Jena, which is also in East Germany, which is where the lenses were made. And they were basically told to do something, right? So the only thing they knew how to do was build Contaxes. So for a very short period of time, I think 47, maybe 48, I didn't memorize the article, but they actually reproduced the Contax 2 in Jena after the war. So genuine German-made Contaxes 2s after the war do exist. They're referred to as Jena Contaxes. They're incredibly rare. Supposedly, there's only two ways to tell them apart. You have to look inside, which if you ever come across a Contax 2 branded that looks weird on the inside, it might be a Jena.
The cold shoe is actually marked as well.
Is it really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
It's a really good tell. You'll see it on the cold shoe. It'll say Jena on it. And
then the only other way to tell, and unfortunately this isn't good because it's on the lens and you could just swap lenses, but the kit lens that came with that camera, the Jena Contaxes, was a more modern version of the Sonar F2 with a modern T coating that the pre-wars did not have. So that's unfortunately not a good tell because, like I said, you could just swap them. But if you had a true Jena Contax, internally, there are some revisions. Brandon, you said the shoe is marked differently, and it'll have a slightly different lens too. They're incredibly rare. Unfortunately, they're very easy to fake. So if you do see something claimed to be a Jena Contax, unless it's been verified by someone like Henry or Mark or hopefully Brandon or Eric, or somebody who truly can vouch for it, I would not consider it to be genuine.
I wanted to go back on the Kievs. I think that's a really valuable point for anyone that's listening to this, that's listening to this podcast particularly. You're going to notice that the pre-war, if you're interested in the pre-war cameras, you're going to look at Kievs at some point. The pre-wars are getting very difficult to find. I've noticed that. I'm always on the lookout just for parts sake on my end, and it's getting pretty difficult to find them in any reasonable condition. If you are interested in Kiev cameras, like you said, that they use the same tooling, they use a lot of the same parts on the earlier cameras. A lot of your Cyrillic text Kievs, you're in the Russian text, those are typically earlier cameras. And what you're going to notice on that is the advanced sprocket is going to be this matte silver. It's going to be a matte silver on the advanced sprocket when you open up the back of the camera. So if you take off the rear cover plate, that's going to almost always signify an early shutter, which is what you want when you're looking at a Kiev. Later years, the mid years, they went to an anodized looking yellowish advanced sprocket, and that's a point in which quality started dropping. And then the terrible quality to always avoid, notably on the Kievs, is anytime you see a black advanced sprocket. Do not get those cameras. They're very terrible quality, and you're almost always going to get a lemon. Yeah. So That's a big thing to look out for as a good tell, just be considering the interchangeability of this shutter. Even a early Cyrillic text Kiev may have a later shutter in it. So that advanced sprocket is a good sign. It's hard to get out of there. So that's a good thing to look at.
And I would encourage anybody who's listening, maybe you're just getting into film and you're like, these guys are nuts. Like, I'm not going to spend $200, $300, $400 on these ancient cameras, but I like what they're saying. If you want to try out a Kiev and you can find one that works, great. It is an accurate representation of what the Contax is like. The Jupiter 8 lenses that are found in almost all those Kievs are actually really good.
Looking at the feds, the Russians really did attempt in most cases to improve upon designs. And a very notable thing on the Kiev cameras is they used a thicker ribbon strap. It's not usable in the Contax repairs. I have some Arsenal ribbon in the event that I find an early Kiev to repair, but that's only for that case. I can't use that in my Contax repairs, and it is beneficial. You'll notice that most Kievs don't have a failed ribbon issue, and it's because of that thicker ribbon that they used in construction. It was definitely an improvement in that sense.
It might have been an accidental improvement, but it was an improvement. But yeah, I don't like to shit on the Soviet cameras just for the sake of doing it, because it's just the quality control so inconsistent. That's really the biggest issue for me. You get a good one, if it works, you're going to get some great images out of those Jupiters. And if, let's say, that's your gateway into getting a real thing, then great. You had a training Contax.
I might add, the most informed individual on this is the recently passed Larry Gubis. Larry wrote a book on Zeiss Contax, on Zeiss photographic material years ago. It's very hard to find. I had the pleasure and the honor to talk with Larry multiple times, because of my addiction to Zeiss LTM class. There was another individual in the Netherlands that we made a list of lenses, of serial numbers, etc. Kiev cameras are great. In fact, my daughter, who's now 18 and just left for university, she shoots one, and she does a great job. Now, when she has 2 or 3 pictures, she's very happy. But it's a gateway. It's $50, $60, $70. So it's a Christmas present. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's doable.
They made a ton of those. They're easy to find for cheap. Yeah, and you can find them in the United States too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
And you don't need to buy 20 Jupiter 3 lenses and blah blah blah. Now I am now getting older, so it's a little bit different. But for me, the Kievs that you were talking about, Mike, and you're very right. The Russians came into Jena around about 44. That's when things went berserk, basically. All kinds of lenses came out, and all kinds of adaptations, and all kinds of stuff was happening. These people were, they were hungry. They didn't have food. These were bad times. Now, the idea that shot glass and Zeiss glass is in the early Jupiters. Yes, they're not called Jupiters; they're called Zorky lenses, ZK to be very fair. But very, very few of them. That doesn't mean that the Kiev cameras with their Jupiter 3 that was redesigned in 1952 were not good enough. No, they were very good. So I agree 100% with you on the Kiev cameras, where it's a way to get into the Contax system for people that don't want to, take $300-$400.
It was my introduction.
I would recommend it. I would definitely recommend doing that. If you the problem that I'm seeing is, if you want a Contax, you're probably not gonna find a working one. So you're gonna have to go through that repair process and everything. So at that point with that investment, you really are better off to at least try a Kiev to see if you like the system.
Absolutely.
One last thing I'll say, and I'll stop talking about it, but even with what's going on over there are still many excellent Ukrainian sellers that are still selling things. Their shipping times are very reasonable. Their costs are reasonable. And I haven't heard a single story and I talked to a lot of people, of somebody who's ordered something from Ukraine, usually through eBay, and had any problems receiving it, and
absolutely.
You can get them. There's many excellent men and women in that country that are still selling things. Lithuania, I've gotten stuff from Lithuania too. At some point, hopefully this, atrocity ends. I know that there's many Russian sellers that have nothing to do with what's going on who love cameras. And prior to last year, there were many excellent Russian sellers too. We all know that Oleg recently relocated out of the country. He's set up his shop at OK Cameras again. I know he's having some trouble with PayPal, but in our hobby, in the world of cameras, there are excellent people over there that have access to these things that you can get them for here, even in the United States, for I can get something from Ukraine for cheaper than I can get it from Canada sometimes.
Here,
100%.
Unreal.
100%.
Can I make just a quick observation? Then I want to do a quick lightning round while we have everybody here. The observation is that we didn't even touch upon the Zeiss-Ikon folders and the Super Icontas, which I know is another passion of Eric's and mine. And hopefully once you get my box with all of the Super Icontas, yours. So I hope that we could reconvene with a focus on the Super Icontas and maybe some of the other folders.
Anthony, it took 2 whole episodes for us to cover Pentax.
Well, then there's the SLRs, because we have to go from the Compaflex, all the way through to the Aria.
I'm willing to not be involved on that one.
We could do a dozen Zeiss-Ikon episodes and probably still not cover anything. But yeah, absolutely. That well is very, very deep. And anybody listening now, I would love to speak to some more Zeiss experts.
Anthony knows my passion for the Super Contax. Now, I might be having problems with my Contax rangefinder addiction, but my Zeiss-Ikon thing is worse.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Oh boy,
I'm absolutely with you on that.
I can even join in that one.
I've got multiple iterations of 9 different models now, so it's dangerous.
We are on the same level there, Anthony. We should do a podcast just by ourselves,
Yes.
Anyone that's questioning getting into the Contax rangefinder system, if you're just interested in Zeiss in general, I would personally just skip that whole system and just get a Contessa 35. You can't beat it. It's the best value in the world. I think this is just the greatest camera for the money there is. And it's like walking around and playing with a Bop It, because you get to wind it from the bottom and talk.
Oh, Brandon's frozen.
Brandon just locked up on us. He convinced me because I had 2 Contessa 35s.
And I've got one of them.
You
Anthony
sold one,
bought one of them.
Yeah.
And the second one isn't for sale.
I'm going to lose credit. I don't like them that much. But anyway, go ahead. Let's do lightning round.
So lightning round, sort of based on the whole topic of the show, which was the fact that Contax were long considered like almost too unrepairable to continue on as a viable shooter. So the lightning round question is there another camera that you have that cannot be repaired that you would love to see another Brandon crop up and say, suddenly I can repair that? So what is the camera that you have that at this moment is unshootable, that is just waiting for the next young gun to come out and say, I have cracked that nut and can fix that camera for you?
Autoflex.
The TLR.
I wish I knew if it worked.
Here's mine.
What's that, Mike?
The Ektra.
Oh, yeah. The
Ektra. This is, honestly, in many ways, this is a Kodak Contax. It's got a really wide rangefinder base. It has a very unique lens mount. It's kind of like a breech lock, I guess. It's not really a bayonet, but it's got interchangeable magazine backs. It's got a zoomable viewfinder, which is really cool. Like for a 1940s camera, when you look through the viewfinder and spin a wheel, the viewfinder itself actually zooms in and changes focal lengths anywhere from 50 millimeter all the way to 254. There's an adjustable diopter for the rangefinder. It's got an optical rangefinder, speeds from 1 to 1,000. They're just not very reliable. It was overly ambitious design by Kodak that when they work, which this one does, Frank Marshman fixed this one. I love shooting it. I would love to have more of these. I would love to see more of them working because they have excellent lenses, but almost nobody will touch these anymore.
Eric's going for the SL2 Leicaflex.
You're right. Mine work, but it's hard to get them. And I have many of them. Fantastic camera. The Leicaflex, the first one, the SL, and the SL2, absolutely fantastic. The R62, sure, it's repairable, but okay. But this one is I had one service. It cost me $450 without taxes and without shipping. So, that's a lot of money. And he doesn't do it anymore.
That camera is considered to be possibly the best SLR ever made.
Absolutely. And I agree. It's fantastic.
Alex, what's your fantasy camera to get fixed now?
Sadly, all of my cameras work, but
What?
but when it does go, the Olympus Stylus Epic. I mean, granted, it's a point and shoot, but man, some of my favorite images have come out of that. Just that I've been able to capture the lens, everything.
That whole generation of plastic point and shoots all belong in the exact same category of unrepairable. So, you could apply that to MJU, to the Contax, whatever it's called, all those electronic cameras. It's a good answer, though.
I was expecting to hear the point and shoots.
Yeah.
Mike, would you be able to guess mine?
That you want to get working?
It should be fairly obvious. I'm missing something here.
Is it the Contax 1?
It is.
Yeah.
The issue I'm having is the sacrificial parts bodies that are so easy to come by on the post-wars aren't quite as cheap when you start looking at Contax ones.
Yeah. He's very hard to get a hold of. I don't know if he'd even be willing to talk to you, but Radu knows how to do it. And he's in Florida. So it's plausible he might have some spare parts. I mean, when you do talk to him, he's very nice. Paul can vouch he's very hard to get a hold of lately.
He's about three hours south of me. I can just show up on the front door and
yeah.
I think Mike sent me.
The Contax ones are, from what I understand, just totally different from the rest of them. I mean, they just they simplified quite a bit. Brandon, you mentioned that the post-war shutters are simplified from the pre-war Contax 2 and 3s, but the Contax completely. 2 and 3s were simplified from the Contax 1. What Radu told me is that the ribbons for the Contax 1s you cannot use any other ribbons for them. So you talked about the Soviets using a different ribbon. Well, you can't use even like what you have from Aki Asahi.
I wonder if that's his. Because I've looked into that shutter a little bit, and the big issue with the 2 is I mentioned the friction system where it rides that ribbon, and it actually relies on a certain amount of friction to properly actuate the shutter. I have to modify the friction clutches on the Contax 2 because the Aki Asahi ribbons are thinner, and it does actually cause it to fault. It will not it does not function properly initially. It takes a lot of finesse and modification on my end to get that proper friction down. I'm curious because what I've found in this repair in my research is a lot of people are unwilling to accept that compromise, which is understandable. I think a lot of people are really locked into it needs to be original or it needs to function as originally intended. I have to make some compromises there to get the intended result. And I'm wondering if it might be that situation.
I don't know.
I'd be curious.
Another thing that I do know is different because he had to replace it on mine is apparently the coupling between the rangefinder and the lens mount. There's actually a nylon cord.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, he actually showed me a picture of mine, and although it hadn't broken, you could see like fibers were just sticking out of it. He goes,
really?
This is one more tug away from just snapping. He goes, so you need to replace it. So I have no idea what he used. Mm-hmm. I don't know where he got it from, but he said he replaced it, and I could vouch. I've shot about maybe 6 rolls of film through that camera since I got it back. And in addition to every other piece of praise I could give for it, the rangefinder is perfectly accurate. So yeah, honestly, I come down to visit Paul on occasion. I've gone down to the Cincinnati shows a couple times. So if in the future I'm headed down that way, if you want to stop in the show, I'll bring you my Contax 1, and at least you can play with it for a little while.
I would love to have an experience with one.
Yeah.
I definitely would love to have one in my display case. Anyone that's listening here that might be of the hopes that I would get into that system for repairs, I would not hold out. I think the Contax, the normal 2 and 2As and 3As, I think those are going to keep me a little too busy, honestly, to be able to make that investment.
I
think that's the reality. I don't think I'll have time either.
Yeah.
And I have read that the Contax 1, the tension adjustment is the metal used in that is susceptible to failing, and it can render the entire body almost useless after so many adjustments. I've read that it can fail catastrophically. So that's just something that I've seen in my small research that I've done with that shutter. It's really intimidating, I guess you could say.
Brandon, I will get you in contact with some people here in Europe that are pretty okay with the Contax 1. The fact that I am not shooting it is one thing, but there's people shooting it, and I know the people that are repairing them.
Oh yeah.
They're very secret because they don't want other people to know that they're repairing them, because they're going to get 500 cameras in the next 2 weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'll contact you after the show and let you know.
Yeah, it'd be at least nice to have that connection in the situation down the road where I find myself able to do so. Definitely a lot of post-war cameras are going to be coming my way.
Absolutely, but then at least you have one for yourself.
No, definitely. I want a working one, 100%. I'm very jealous every time Mike brags about his.
Yeah. I know the feeling.
Very jealous. I won't lie. I read that article.
We are jealous. We're jealous people, you know. He did it again.
Theo, what's your camera, Theo?
It's a bit of an unfair question because I've got Jess here. She'll actually attempt at fixing anything. So there's not much that she won't attempt. But one thing that everybody has turned their nose off, and I'm not sure it's worth anybody getting into it, is the Petries. You take a Petri into a service person and they'll sob momentarily and then tell you to go away because they just don't work.
My choice is actually the most modest choice on here, and I just want to find one person that will replace the bellows on Kodak folding cameras.
The monitor.
I've got a monitor. I've got the monitor with the special astigmat lens, and it's basically a folding Medalist. But boy, the Kodak bellows were horrible. They are all just disintegrating. You can't put enough liquid electrical tape on them to keep them patched. Or if you do, they're just permanently erected because you can't fold them back again. And they're apparently riveted on in a way that it's very difficult to change the bellows. Mike's holding up two Duo 620s.
Super 620s.
Yeah, they made less than 800 of them. I have two right here. They both have pinholes.
Yeah.
So it's the exact same problem you describe, Anthony. Despite the effort they put into making these great cameras, they did not use the leather bellows like Nagel did.
And so I just want one person that'll say, yes, I can change the bellows in your Kodak monitor. And I don't think it's ever going to happen.
There's a Chinese Etsy store that will manufacture bellows to a desired size.
But that's not the problem. The problem's not getting the bellows. It's getting somebody who will install it because they're riveted in. So you have to cut the rivets and then figure out how you're going to reattach the bellows to it.
And supposedly the metal where it's riveted to is susceptible to rust, and it's just a weak metal. So even if you're successful at getting the old one off and a new one made, reattaching it and actually having it hold, I'm told, I've never tried it. I think Jürgen Krekel told me this, that getting a new one reattached is incredibly difficult and it's just not worth it.
So there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Kodak cameras out there unusable because of those damn bellows.
Right. Did we get everybody?
I think so.
Got them.
All right. Well, we've run out of time. This has been an incredibly fascinating and incredibly fun podcast. Brandon, thank you so much, not only for coming, but I'm going to echo what Eric said and just thank you for doing what you're doing. It's not even just that you're doing Contaxes, it's that you have an enthusiasm that it's addicting. You know, I hope people listen to this show and I hope people read about what you're doing and it inspires them. Literally yesterday, I had a conversation with Frank Marshman, who is an old kind of repair guy. You know, he learned the School of Hard Knocks way. He invested years and years of his time, money. He learned from other people. He's skilled at repairing cameras, but he's a bit jaded at how the internet promotes these shade tree mechanic repairs. And he took offense to a couple of things that I had made in a recent post that I made about some of the things I do. And I told him that while, yes, I know that there's many wrong ways to repair a camera, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep encouraging people, because every once in a while, a Brandon Monroe will pop up. For every, what did he say? Joe Lunchbucket was the term he used. For every 100 Joe Lunchbuckets, if we can get one more person like you doing what you do to take the time to ask the experts, because like we said in one of the previous episodes about CLAing your cameras, now's the time to do it. A huge number of these original people who've been working on this stuff, they're near retirement age or going to die. And there just is a lull or a complete lack of people who want to take up this stuff and learn things to do it. I mean, Aiden's trying to learn, you're trying to learn, Jess is trying to learn. There are people out there, but they need help. They need encouragement. So, yes. You know, I doubt Mark Hansen or Harry Scherer is going to listen to this episode. I know you commented that some of those guys are more helpful than others.
Yes.
If anybody hears me talking now and you know how to fix stuff, please try to help people who are trying to learn. They're not all people looking to just dump lighter fluid into a camera like I am to make things working. Some of these people are really trying to learn, and it's gonna extend the life of these cameras. I mean, even if it's just Brandon, he is putting back into the world serviced and properly working Contaxes that could last another couple decades, of shooting enjoyment. So thank you, Eric. Thank you for coming on the show. You and I have spoken many, many, many times before. You're very active in a lot of the photography groups. We've never spoken in person, but I love your collection of lenses. I wish we could spend more time. I wish I could see those lenses myself. Like, that would be the cool.
I want to use them.
Brandon, the house that I live in Europe is 700 years old. You're welcome the next 50.
I appreciate that, Eric. And I really appreciate what you had to say as well, Mike. And thank you guys really for having me on here. Like I said, it's a bit of a learning process, and I'm doing the best I can to do these the best that I can. So Paul has been working with me. I find out things every day on how I can do these better. And that investment is something that I'm willing to make. And hopefully we get some cameras working in people's hands. Cool. And I want them shooting images again.
Awesome. Alex, thanks for coming back on the show. Aiden, always a pleasure to see you on here. We lost Alex, your father-in-law had to sign off. We had a couple people try to get in that couldn't. So sorry for you guys who couldn't talk to us. The next episode, we're going to record actually 3 weeks from now. We have to take a 1 week gap between a normal 2 weeks cadence, but we're going to talk American cameras with our next episode. We're going to cover some of the unloved brands or ones that aren't talked about a whole lot. I have lined up 2 guests, Mike Reitzma and Phil Starrett, who are both big-time Argus collectors. They know a lot about the history of that company. They're part of the Argus Collectors Group in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm trying to get a few other special guests that have a lot of knowledge on American-made cameras too. So I think the next episode will be pretty fascinating about some cameras that maybe some people haven't given a lot of thought about or wouldn't consider using. But believe it or not, some of them cameras are actually really, really fun to use. The topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced by our listeners. We encourage people to join us. Please, if you come on the show, ask some questions, participate in the conversations. Even on shows where we have a guest like we did today, we never know what kinds of questions we're going to get. So we love seeing new faces. We love our regular listeners. But until next time, you guys all have a great rest of your week, and have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right,
Cheers,
bye-bye.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Eric, if I could put out a personal plea, could you do me a favor and talk to Stephen Coves and ask him to let me back into the Zeiss-Historica group? He kicked me out.
He did.
He doesn't like me, and I don't know why.
Bad boy. He bad boy.
So can you do me a favor and say you need to let Mike Ekman back in?
I did ask for permission to talk for the Zeiss Historical. So, I might have a chance. So okay. I will try.
All right. Thank you.